Free trade areas, customs unions and single markets. What are they? What are they for? And what's the difference between them? The economic theory of what's known as economic integration was laid out by an economist called Jacob Weiner in 1950. It consists of 7 stages, which are accompanied by increasing political integration. This is essentially the model that's being pursued by the European Union in its process of political and economic integration. As we explore these subjects, we're going to refer to tariffs, which is another word for import taxes, and trade barriers. So it might be worth watching our video on these subjects first. There's a link in the video description. Preferential trading areas are the result of trade deals between 2 or more nations that reduce tariffs and other trade barriers, but don't abolish them entirely. They're agreements that countries put in place to open their domestic markets to trade with other countries, in exchange for access to their markets. Free trade areas are groups of states that have signed free trade agreements to remove some or all tariffs and other barriers to trade between them. The line between what constitutes a preferential trading area versus a free trade area is somewhat blurred, but a free trade area is loosely described as a more advanced stage of economic integration, which may have removed all tariffs and trade barriers between members. The purpose of both is to increase economic efficiency. Both have customs borders between nations, and both still enable individual national governments to impose different tariffs and other trade barriers with nations outside the area. One of the largest free trade areas in the world is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which exists between Canada, the USA and Mexico. At this point, it's worth pointing out that there is no absolute reason why nations should necessarily go beyond being part of free trade areas, unless they are prepared to or want to be politically integrated. A customs union is a group of countries who trade freely with each other without any trade barriers, but who impose common tariffs and other trade barriers for goods imports coming in from elsewhere in the world. There are no customs borders between nations within a customs union, although in many cases there'll still be border checks for things like contraband, drugs and human traffic, and arrangements for different taxes to be collected. A customs union can, in some instances, extend economic efficiency further than a free trade area, but the purpose of a customs union is typically to establish closer political ties between member countries. Indeed, becoming part of a customs union does mean becoming politically integrated with other nations. Individual nations can no longer set their own tariffs or impose their own trade barriers, and they can therefore no longer do independent trade deals with other nations across the world. Neither can they define their own product standards and regulations. Becoming part of a customs union means an individual nation giving up some of its sovereign powers and losing control of important economic levers. In the past, when customs transactions were paper-based, time-consuming and laborious, this loss of sovereign power was perhaps offset to an extent by an economic saving from the elimination of customs controls. But today, due to computerisation and automation, the overhead of importing goods via a customs border typically range from 1% down to 0.05%, depending on the value, type and size of the consignment in question. Risk-based and intelligence-led checks now mean that less than 1% of goods are physically checked at customs borders. There are a number of customs unions across the world. The smallest is the customs union between Switzerland and the tiny neighbouring state of Liechtenstein. The largest customs union by far is the European Union's customs union, which consists of all the member states of the European Union. Single markets go beyond customs unions by providing freedom of movement of goods, services, capital and people, or labour. So again result in nations giving up their sovereign powers to a centralised political authority. The loss of sovereign powers over movement of people can have significant ramifications for nations on their employment, wages, housing supply and housing costs, and the burden on public services. Economic unions start to impose common external barriers to the supply of services, capital and labour, again removing sovereign power from nation states. Economic and monetary unions extend centralised power over monetary policy through a central bank such as the European Central Bank, over short-term borrowing and money supply, and start to introduce centralised fiscal control of government revenue and expenditure. This is the stage of economic integration that the European Union has now reached. Complete economic integration is the final stage at which national governments are given up all control over international trade, product standards and regulations, internal and external movement of services, capital and labour, and monetary and fiscal policy, which in other words means taxation and public spending. The main reasons why economic integration is pursued are political. The powers of a nation to run its own economy are hugely important powers. The economic and broader political and legal integration of countries within the European Union has been described as a ratchet. Over time, powers have gradually moved from national governments to the European Union in one direction. However, in 2016, the people of the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union. After that vote, those who wanted to leave were generally happy to revert to free trade with the EU, whilst those who wanted to remain campaigned to remain in the customs union and therefore still give up political power over key areas of economic policy. In a future video, we'll look in further depth at the implications for the UK of leaving the EU single market and the customs union. To see our future videos, follow us on Twitter or Facebook, but be sure to select See First, or the chances are you may not see the videos in your newsfeed. Or to be sure you don't miss anything, subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon. That way you'll get a notification by email as soon as a new video is available. In the meantime, please do help us out and like and share or retweet this post so your friends and followers can see it too. Thank you for watching. See you next time.